Coming up on The Returned.
I collapsed. My whole systems just crashed. They found the infection and they pumped out pints and pints and pints of this infection. I am in this hospital room, not knowing what's going to happen next. I was spiking these really high fevers. They said, I think we better call Bridget's mom to come back because she's not going to make it. I was there in this deep sadness and surrender, and from behind the curtain, Bridget, you're dying. I truly didn't want to die. I will tell you this, is that I woke up to the most glorious light, and he was just across from me.
Hi, and welcome to The Returned. The truth always follows you back. Hi, and welcome to The Returned, a place we share near-death stories, out-of-body experiences, spiritual awakenings, signs from spirit, and the journeys of healers and lightworkers from around the world. Today we sit with Bridget Cook Birch, author, speaker, and near-death experiencer. Bridget's story is one of unconditional love, radical compassion, and what can happen when life is given a second chance. Bridget, welcome to The Returned.
Thank you, MJ. I'm really honored to be here and just really excited for our conversation today.
Thank you. Before we get to the heart of the conversation, I always like to ground the audience in who you were before your experience. So, what was life like for you before your near-death experience? And did religion or spirituality play a role in your life or your upbringing?
Well, that is a very good question. And the answer is yes, yes, yes. I grew up Catholic in a little Mormon town called Brigham City, Utah. And so religion was all around me. And there was a lot of, who's right, who's wrong kind of mentality between a lot of the different faiths. And, but especially it seemed between these two, like, well, if we're right, then you're wrong. But if you're right, then we're wrong. And it was kind of fascinating. And so that colored some of my beliefs. I didn't ever want to be wrong. But I will tell you, I had some things that happened in the early months of my life that made a huge difference in terms of who I thought I was and who I thought I wasn't. And by the time I was 6 months old, I had 7 parents. And so I had been conceived, and then I was I was in foster care and put up for adoption, and then I was adopted at 6 months old. So at 6 months old, I already felt like there was something wrong with me, that there must be a reason that the big people would always leave. And so as I went throughout life, I kept trying to earn love, kept trying to prove myself, wanted to be significant, and especially in my parents' eyes. But I was also fierily independent. So I most often would not accept help, but it would get me into some really terrible situations and trouble and problems and struggle. And I went from University of Utah up to this little town of Logan that I really loved. It was a little college town, and it was a kind of a wild partying town too, and just my scene. But I had this interesting dichotomy because there was a part of me that really longed for God. My dad was a deacon in the Catholic Church. My mom would bring in converts to the Catholic Church. I had enough guilt to be a Jewish princess, but I yearned for God, and I thought maybe at one point I would become a nun, but I was this wild partier, so I didn't believe that I was worthy enough. I didn't believe that I was worthy enough to actually come before God as a nun. And so I just continued forward with my struggles and kept going to school full time, and I was working full time. Then I was working 2 jobs, and then I began working 3 jobs trying to get out of a pile of debt. And I started failing in school, failing in my classes. I'm still trying to have a social life and, be a young person in college, but everything started to deteriorate and go downhill. And I was no longer trustworthy. There just was a lot of terrible situations that were happening in my life. And I felt like just the dust under God's feet. I didn't feel like I was worthy of his love or even his attention or anything. What I didn't know, MJ, was that in all this stress, I was eating myself from the inside out. I had an infection in my abdomen and ulcers and fissures in my colon, and I developed sepsis, but I didn't know it. All I knew was I got off work one night and I felt so lousy. And I'd lost like 30 pounds in 3 days, and I did not have 30 pounds to lose. I took like the last $5 of tips that I had in my waitress pocket, and I put money for my truck, gas in the truck, and I headed down the canyon. And I look back now and I'm like, I had no business driving. I drove down this canyon, I'm shaking, and I'm barely, able to stay on the road. And it's just like, go get to mom. Just go get to mom. And so I pulled up in her driveway, and this is what I can tell you is that this is the woman that I wanted to please the most. This is the woman that I really wanted to be proud of me. And I also tried to be independent from, because what if she rejected me, right? So I was always living with this rather dichotomatic. I can't, I'm making up Bridgetisms. I just had such a dichotomy of thought when it came to her. Um, and so here I pull into her driveway. I have to drag myself out of the truck to her door. And it still makes me emotional just to think about is, I have to knock on her door and just be the wretch that I felt like I was. And I knock on her door, and she was surprised. And then she took one look at me, and with such great compassion, she put me straight into her car, drove me across town to the doctor's office. And there I collapsed. And luckily it was right next door to the hospital, because they put me in immediately into emergency surgery. Like my whole systems just crashed. And they found the infection, and they pumped out pints and pints and pints of this infection. And they put me on intravenous antibiotics, and they had to give it to me through what's called a subclavian, because I was so emaciated that a regular IV wouldn't work. So they throw me on all these IV antibiotics, and then they're waiting for me to get better. But what nobody knew was that I was allergic to one of the antibiotics. So instead of getting better, I was growing worse and worse. And my mom was with me, night and day for a couple of days. And finally, she brings the priest in. And I felt a little bit better, like if I lived or died, it would be okay. But I was really in terrible shape, and I was spiking these super high fevers. And I remember most of that time as being very blurry. And then I had a situation where it was like, I woke up and I had been speaking to my roommate from behind the curtain. We had an experience together where she and her husband had been reading from the big book. And I had taken some 12-step courses, and I had quit drinking by the time I turned 21, because I had 7 of my friends die by that time of drug and alcohol related issues. And so I'd quit drinking. But the thing that had brought me to this discussion was with her were the words of God, was talking about God and talking about surrender. And here I am in this hospital room, not knowing what's going to happen next. And so we had a couple of conversations, and I had a special experience where she'd gone in for surgery. When she came out, her body was not accepting the medication, and she had an old-fashioned gallbladder surgery. And so she was feeling every cut and every stitch. And she's, behind the curtain. I've never seen her, just talked with her. She's writhing in pain. And I felt so bad. And I didn't know that I was what's called empathic. All of a sudden, I felt all her pain in my body. And I was like, oh gosh, someone help this woman. And I just felt so bad for her. And then I heard her bishop had come and I heard him give her a blessing. And he commanded her body to accept the medication. And within about 15 seconds, I heard her sigh. The pain left my body. And the next thing I know, she's asleep. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what the heck that was, but that was something. And so it stayed with me. It lingered. And that night, I was growing worse and worse. And I was spiking these really high fevers. And they'd come down for a little bit and then they'd spike back up. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, I listened to these two nurses that were having a conversation just outside in the hallway, just outside our door. And they said, I think we better call Bridget's mom to come back because she's not going to make it until morning. And when I was that age, there was a part of me that felt so invincible. Like, I'm young, I'm going to live forever, at least for another, 40 or 50 years if I wasn't quite so wild. And so I thought this can't be happening, but I'm hearing them and I realize I'm dying. And this really horrific sadness overcame me because I knew that I had not fulfilled the measure of my creation. And I had no clue what that was, but I knew that I hadn't done it. And so I was there like in this deep sadness and surrender. And my roommate from behind the curtain, she said, Bridget, you know you're dying, don't you? And I said, yes. And then it was like a Mack truck moment because it's something I never would have asked for before. But I said, well, hey, can anyone have one of those blessings? And she said, yes. And she called her husband and he brought another person down and they gave me a blessing. And I felt a little different. I don't know if it was my mom's intercessory prayers and theirs. I don't know if it was because I truly didn't want to die. But I know that I fell asleep for a little while and they left. But I will tell you this is that I woke up to the most glorious light in my hospital room, the most glorious presence. And he was just across from me and I knew who he was. I looked in his eyes and it was Jesus. It just so unmistakable, so undeniable. And, sometimes it's still so hard to describe in words and I love words, but this light, this unconditional love was like so whole and so alive. It was so alive. Like everything in my hospital room was vibrating. The lights, the equipment, my metal tray table, my hospital gown, my skin, like every atom was vibrating with his love. And I was just so fascinated and enthralled, but mostly just his eyes. And we had a conversation, not with words, but we just had this conversation. And all I can explain it was through his eyes. But he told me I was being given a second chance at life. And it felt like this time was forever. Like everything was suspended. Everything was, it was timeless. And, except this vibration that I was feeling from him. But to have this knowledge, like to look into his eyes, I felt like I understood universes of knowledge. Like I understood all creation. It was overwhelming. It was so beautiful. And honestly, MJ, the biggest thing that really affected me was that, the story I had been telling myself, especially for the last several months of that year, was just what a loser I was, how unworthy I was. I didn't even feel worthy of life or worthy of breathing. I I wouldn't take my life. That wasn't part of my belief systems, but I didn't feel worthy of holding life inside my body. And I felt like I was a failure. I was a loser. I was an idiot. I just felt like everything had come undone. And in his presence, in those eyes, in that incredible light and love, all I felt was no conditions. Like he didn't care how much debt I was in. He didn't care, about my social life and the relationships I had screwed up and, my relationships with my roommates. That was all a mess. He didn't care that I wasn't getting along with my parents. He didn't care like all these lousy, lousy choices that I had made. He just loved me. And that in itself was such an incredible miracle. I had never been in the presence of that type of love. And my parents were very loving people, but this was worlds beyond anything I had ever experienced on earth. And it lingered. It lingered in my body, it lingered in my soul. It was just magnificent. And there was one point in it. It doesn't feel to me like it was very long, but time was not linear. But I came out and I just remember I'm up here and I'm looking at him, looking at me, looking at him, right? And there's just being able to see that for a moment and feel everything that I could see in his eyes. And then, I don't feel like I was like granted a choice or anything. I've heard other people say, I feel like when I prayed and I was sad and I wanted to keep on living, that I had already made my choice, but he is the one who gave me that second chance. I was dying, but he gave it to me. And in his presence, I just knew it. I knew I would have this opportunity to live. I didn't know what I was going to do, who I was going to be, who I was going to marry. I didn't have any premonitions. I didn't have any of that. But I knew that I would live and that this was a great gift. And it still makes me so emotional. And um, there was one other presence in the room, and he also was full of light. And I didn't know who this was. It was almost like he was a guardian or a protector type thing. And later on, I had some spiritual experiences and found out that he was Archangel Michael. But my whole being was focused on Christ, just because this back and forth. Anyway, he gave me that promise, and I fell asleep, and then like really fell asleep for the first time in days. And when I woke up, was the next morning early, and you know how they don't care, and they're wheeling in more intravenous antibiotics and checking on things, and buzzers are going off. And this nurse, she proceeds to throw, 6 or 7 more antibiotics up there. And I said, hey, I can have all of these, but not this one. And she looked at me, she goes, what do you mean? We thought you were going to die last night. You have to be on this. This is the only thing saving your life. And I said, not this one. It's killing me. And MJ, never, ever before in my life had I ever gone against an authority figure. Like behind their back, yes, but never up front, especially because in our family, there was God, then there were the priests and the deacons, and then there were doctors, right? So as close to God as you could possibly get. And so you would never say no to a medical authority, but I did. I knew. I never remember him telling me. I knew in my bones I could not have that. I was given that knowledge. And so she walks away just thinking I'm a French fry shy of a Happy Meal. Like she races off to tell the doctor, and she's so flustered and so upset, and I'm so relieved. And the doctor comes in to visit me, and he's just looking at me, but he has a lot of compassion. And he asked me to tell the whole story. He's like, why this one? Why do you feel this way? And I told him what had happened. And fortunately for me, he'd visited with other patients who'd had near death experiences, and they'd come back with some sort of knowledge, some sort of healing, something. He said, well, he tells the nurse, she's on all the rest of these. We'll keep her on all of them except this one. She was furious, but I was so relieved. And I will tell you what, I walked out of the hospital the very next day on my own power. And so to me, it was absolutely undeniable. It wasn't comfortable to my family. My mom, very Catholic, she didn't like some of the things that I was trying to say. So I kept it quiet to just about everybody except my roommate and I became friends afterwards. And it was quite a while later that she said, have you read a book called Embraced by the Light? And I said, no. And it was the very first time I'd heard anything about that. But this woman had written it and she talked about it and all these things. And I still had this little, who am I to share my experiences? Plus, it was so sacred. Like I couldn't even stand the thought of someone saying, no, you're just insane, or which I thought people would, or that there's no way that this happened or anything like that, because it was such a gift. And I wasn't gonna deny that sacredness. So I walked out of that hospital and I will tell you something, into a brand new life, into an absolutely brand new life.
Wow. Wow. Bridget, I am going to start with this. Why do you think this experience happened for you?
I've been asked that by some people who question it because they could tell I was not a very worthy person in their eyes before this. And in my eyes, certainly not. And I think it's because of someone like me, so lost, so forlorn, so alone, with so much struggles, could have access to that light, that unconditional love. I believe it means that we all can. I believe that, redemption is a part of our journey here, that making mistakes and learning from them and being able to figure things out and to be able to move forward and figure out that we have a mission and a calling that our soul longs for. And we're here to discover that and to grow. So I think why is not because I'm blessed above another for any reason whatsoever. I think it's because in my soul, I had some things I really deeply wanted to do. And I think it's a combination of everyone's intercessory prayers, and I believe in that, and my own soul's yearning, again, to be significant in the eyes of God. And we've had a few interesting experiences since then, too, where I have learned that, I even twisted that for a while, that I set out to prove that there must have been something worth saving. And so I'm delighted to tell you that I don't operate from that belief anymore. But that was one of the most difficult to get rid of because it was my operating system for a few decades. But it propelled me forward because it was like this second chance. Not everybody gets one of these. Like, what are you going to do with it? And, when I was growing up, my mom had this little prayer on the bathroom mirror, and it was like a morning prayer. Good morning, God, and thank you for the glory of the sun. And thank you for the help I have to get my duty done. And it goes into these other things, very old fashioned prayer. And it says, I know there's been days that I have whiled away, but I promise to make this your very special day. And so once more, good morning, God, and please depend on me because I want to honor you for all eternity. And I think I still hold that little girl and her desire to serve God and to experience all that life has to offer and people and their stories and to see them the way that God does. So I think that's part of the reason.
Well, I wonder a little bit about something, and that's you're adopted, right? And then you always had a longing. And so I was wondering if also you needed to feel you needed to feel what unconditional love felt like because you had such a yearning for that as well.
I think that you would be correct about that. I've done a lot of deep inner work in this
Mhm.
regard. Just because after this, I recognized that wounding. And so I did a lot of self-development and deep inner work and a lot of spiritual work and a lot of meditation to be able to uncover that. And it's very interesting that people who are adopted often have this deep
Mhm.
wound. Not always, but most often. And as you said, like this yearning, this longing to be recognized, loved, and accepted for who they are. And but even then, for some of us, like what I experienced is I thought, wasn't I good enough? Wasn't I pretty enough? Wasn't I smart enough? Wasn't I enough that they had to give me up? But my mother said something one time to me that I carried, and I still had my wounds, but I carried this. And she said, "You were not born under my heart, but in it." And that that always just moved me, and so I tried to begin to see our relationship as special and the life that she and my father had given me as special. And I stopped looking at my own life through so much judgment or the fear of theirs, and I slowed down and I just loved them. And I found that I could really love people after this experience because I had been so deeply nourished, so deeply loved that I knew what that was. And so I love to be in people's presences and just love them.
Mm. Did you have any type of life review?
I did not, but I think it's because I was so flat out barren. I was so vulnerable. I was in those last breaths and there was literally
Mm.
nothing between me and the Savior, if that makes sense. Like
Mhm.
everything, I knew He knew me. And that's why I was so amazed that He loved me because I was like, how could you love this? How could you love this trembling, sick, horrific thing, who's made all these bad choices? Like, how could you? And yet He did. And so, um, I've heard of those. I've helped authors with those, but I didn't have that, and I just think it's because I was barren. I was
Mm.
I was just raw.
And do you believe in any type of pre-birth planning? Do you believe in that?
It's very interesting that you would say that. So, I didn't grow up with that as a Catholic. That
Mhm.
wasn't part of our belief
Mm.
systems. Um, I studied and embraced Mormonism for a while.
Mm.
I did not stay there, but there is a belief that, there is a life before this and that you choose to come here. And
Mm.
that felt very comfortable to me. And then I had some experiences that in healing, like doing womb work and understanding my birth mother more. And I was a secret for over 50 years. And then through a thank you gift from one of my authors, I did his ancestry kit and found my birth family after not knowing really a thing for 50 years. And so that's a whole other story. But I will tell you that when my father passed, he came back a couple of times, very significant times. And the very first time he came back, he told me, "This was my last time." I was like, "Whoa, what?" Because he was a Catholic deacon. That was not something that was part of those beliefs. But he was like very adamant, "This was my last time." And what it did was it opened me up. It opened me up to realize that a lot of things that religions and beliefs and other things have is, they're I like to think of them as books of knowledge. And so I gather a lot of books of knowledge, and some things really resonate with me and some things don't. And I've had two small flashes of past life experiences that felt very real to me. I will tell you the realest thing I ever felt was, face to face with the Savior.
Oh,
That was the
yeah.
realest thing I have ever experienced. But these were like small flashes that felt very real and very different from the life that I was living. Two very ancient things. And I've carried those. I've held them as sacred. And I don't know what they all mean. And when I've gone into meditation and other spiritual things, I I have journeyed to different places in my meditation, but I haven't gone backwards, and I just don't feel like it's a big need for me, if that makes sense.
Right. The reason why I brought that up, the pre-birth planning, is some would say that you choose, your path or your parents or your life prior to. And it's always interested me in with adopted children is they always have that feeling. A lot of the people, and funny, I always wished I was adopted. But I'm not. But everybody that I know that is have had that same feeling that you talk about. And so, but then they have this adopted family who just love them, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then it makes me think, was that the point? You needed this family,
Well,
to
honestly,
get
as
you
as
where
I
you were going?
yeah, when
Uh-huh.
I've met my birth family, who I adore, on both
Uh-huh.
my mother's side, my father's side, who would have been my stepfather, but we didn't know it. I adore them all. Like, I'm just so grateful for them, and it's so fun seeing, like, genetic, predispositions that they
Yeah.
have, and, eyes. I didn't have the same eyes as anyone in my family, and then all of a sudden, I'm looking at them, and it was the wildest thing. But there's also a recognition that I would not be this person that is sitting before you had I been raised in either of those households. I just would not. I'd be a completely different person. So, yes, I do feel like I chose that. I also feel
Mhm.
like I chose that really deep core wound,
Yeah.
um, so that I could overcome it.
Mhm.
Because and obviously I couldn't do it on my own, so I wasn't a strong one. I wasn't a valiant warrior. I needed Christ right in the room with me in order to do that. But I do feel like I heard Mother Teresa say one time, she said, "I am a little pen in the hand of a God who is writing a love letter to the world." And I thought, "Oh my gosh, that's me. If there's anything that I can do to write his love, to speak his love, to be his love, to embody that love." I'm not Mother Teresa. She has her very own very special gifts, and I would never take
Mhm.
that from her. But I feel like I have some gifts of story. Like when I came back, I have, you tell me your story, and some of the podcasts of yours that I listen to, and I see the threads of these stories, and then I hear another one and it's woven in
Mhm.
here, and I hear another one, oh, it's woven in here. It's like I can see that. And I can hold it. I can hold people's stories, and I can love them unconditionally from beginning to end because I see how glorious they are. And so I feel like that was a gift that I was given, but also
Yeah.
would I have been that same person because it was my mother who was a teacher, my adoptive mom. She let me read as many library books as I wanted, and I had tons of library finds, and I would go down to the city library and come back with 25 books, and she would just kind of smile and nod and shake her head, but she let me immerse myself in story. And I just don't think it would have been the same in any of these other households. So I bless them
Wow.
all. And I'm really grateful that I grew up where I did.
Absolutely. Your experience speaks so powerfully about unconditional love. And it makes
Yeah.
me wonder, why do so many of us struggle to believe we're worthy of that very love that you experienced?
It's so interesting because, I've worked with just um, simple, everyday, ordinary people. I've also worked with rock stars and multi-billionaire CEOs and, you know, people from all different backgrounds and walks of life. And I will tell you this is that this is I feel like it is part of the veil that comes over us when we're conceived, when we come into this earthly plane, is that it is part of that veil. It's because we're separated from the light, and it is something that I think is meant for our good, because we spend our lives searching to find it, searching to find something to be worthy of. And deep inside, it really is to be back in the presence of God. But we have things to do while we're here. And I can tell you that for
Mhm.
certain. When I get to explore and be with other people's stories and see all these incredible threads, and it's like, oh my goodness, that this is one story of creation, and it is so intricately woven. And I see that for every single person, no matter who they are.
Mm.
Everyone has an extraordinary story. So I really do feel, and no matter how confident people are, they will tell me their deepest fears, their greatest vulnerabilities. And at the core of it, MJ, is that not enoughness. It is part of our universal being here on this side. And quite frankly, I have met just a few people who don't have that, and they're narcissists or true sociopaths, and their brains are wired differently. And in the case of sociopaths and many narcissists, it's a chemical wash that came over their brain when they experienced some trauma or had something else happen to them. And so it's nothing of their own doing, but it does affect their behavior later. And and so, yeah, it's really, really fascinating
Mm.
that.
It sounds like you encountered a reality where nothing needed to be earned or proven. And I'm wondering how that has changed the way you see success, achievement, self-worth here in this reality.
Mhm. Well, I'd love to tell you that, like, this magic wand took place and I didn't need it anymore. But I think, as I mentioned, uh, Christ Christ and I had a beautiful spiritual experience in 2020, and, he told me that ever since that near-death experience that I had been lying to myself. And I'm like, "What? No, I haven't." He's like, "Oh, yes, you have." "No, I haven't." Like, to my very core, to my very being, it's like, this is the truest thing that has ever happened to me. There is no lie there. And he said, "You told yourself there must have been something worth saving, and you've set out to
Mm.
prove that ever since." And I just went, oh, and it, MJ, it shattered my identity. I didn't realize how, before I was trying to prove that I was worthy of love in his presence. I was worthy of love, but then I was trying to prove there was something worth saving. And it was so unconscious. It was so deep. It was so at the core that, I was in a lot of denial. But he was so specific and so loving and so adamant. And I realized I could be sitting on the couch, eating bonbons, watching TV, and he would love me just enough.
Yeah.
And that was a very difficult revelation for me, because then it was like, well, what has all the rest of this been for? And then I realized he let me sit with that for a long time for a couple different reasons. Through my struggles, I have found my strengths. I found my gifts. I found my calling, which is story. I have found this ability that I have with others to help them bring out their stories. I wouldn't have if I could have just been sitting on the couch. I think I would have gone out and done something, because I was free and I was given a second chance to fulfill the measure of my creation. But I'll tell you what, I really set out to do that thing. Since 2020, I had just barely found my birth family. Then I had this intense spiritual experience and my whole identity was shattered. But then it was like, now wait a minute. Would I choose this all again? Would I be involved in stories like I am? Would I love people this much? Would I love their stories? Would I help them bring them out to the world? And the answer was a hell yes. I definitely would. So then I've been able to piece back um, parts of my identity, but on my own spiritual terms, if that makes sense. And it's between me and my creator. And so I really seek to have pure knowledge, pure light now. I let go of things that feel full of judgment, feel full of fear. You'll notice I don't participate in a lot of hate situations or rallies or things like that. But if there's something on the side of love, I will be one of the first people there. And so yeah, that's a really
I
good
love
question.
that.
Thank you.
I understand exactly what you mean when you couldn't believe that he actually came for you, because I had that same feeling and I was afraid to tell people that
Yeah.
Jesus came. Jesus showed up. I was afraid to tell people. I thought they would laugh, and I did tell a few people, and that is exactly what did happen. And I thought, well, I'm not religious. How could he ever come for me?
Right.
And so I understand that part of your experience. And another part of the experience that I understand is who and how much love and the vibration that he does carry. I have that same, I can still feel it. Blows my mind.
Yeah. And you still exude it when you invite, when you talk with people, and you exude it a lot when you're listening to. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. And then, so I wanted to actually pivot another direction. I know that you speak a lot about compassion, and I was wondering, is there someone in your life you found impossible to forgive before your experience? And how did your perspective change after the experience?
Wow. Um,
Sorry.
no, that is really great. I I think because my self-esteem, um, I was confident in certain things and I was completely not confident in others. And by the time I was at this low, um, I did not hold a lot of confidence. And so I questioned all kinds of things, even, when something was done to me. I had a situation as a waitress where This really good looking guy asked me out after work, and we were just supposed to go for a ride in his truck and everything. And he ended up taking advantage of me. And I felt like it was all my fault, even though I said no, even though I cried, even though these things, and he would not take no for an answer. And in my mind, I just put it on myself like I did everything else. Like, well, of course, you're so stupid. You're this, you're that. And so the, before that experience, the person that I needed to forgive the most, honestly, was me. I was not holding on any self-compassion. That's why I was eating my own body from the inside out. Um, and so as I went along in the world, after, with a lot of like all this love for people and other things, sometimes I would get into situations because I would love so deep and so hard and so big. And like our incredible creator, I could see them for who they really are, and I didn't always see them for the games they played in life. And I think the time that came to a standstill was when I was working on a book with Melissa Moore, who's the daughter of the happy face serial killer. And we worked on this book together, and I interviewed her father through letters and other things, but I also, being empathic, like I could feel the hurt and the confusion and the damage that he had done to his own daughter, to her psyche, and to the point where she would question herself and her own choices. And I saw that, and I was mad at him. And I wasn't throwing a lot of forgiveness his way. We'll just say that, and a lot of people would say, well, of course, he's a serial killer. But this was antithetical to what had happened to me and what I felt about most human beings. And I will share with you that I had started saying this prayer that really changed my life. And it was, dear God, let me see through your eyes. Let me hear with your ears. Let me feel with your heart. And when prompted, let me speak with your words or write them. And my father, in one of these incredible experiences I had when he came back, he showed me, I was in a group meditation and then I was just gone. And so I'm with my father and my grandmother on my mother's side. And my dad's all in a full tux and my grandfather is in a full tux. My dad is dancing with my grandmother. And, they're ballroom music and they're just going round and around and she's dressed to the nines and they're both just smiling widely. And what's important to know is that they didn't always get along on earth. My grandmother was upset with him because he had married her daughter and taken her and her two grandchildren away from Detroit, Michigan to Utah, where he was an engineer out at Thiokol. And so she'd been really upset with him and took their wedding picture down, put my mom's graduation picture back up on the mantle. There was a lot of angst between them. So here I'm in this meditation and my dad shows me them dancing and he said, the games we play in life. And I was like, wow. And then he showed me that prayer that I'd been saying. Let me see through your eyes, hear with your ears, feel with your heart. And he showed me like this big, huge, bright white bubble of light. And I will say nothing compared to the Savior's light, but it was bright and beautiful and very humbling to see this light surrounding me. Except at one point there was this black wall, MJ, and it was so abrupt, it scared me. I was like, what is that? And my dad had me look over on the other side of the wall, and there was Keith Hunter Jesperson, the happy face serial killer. And it wasn't that I hated him. It was that I had been angry with him and I withheld my love. And my dad said, how much love do you think he receives behind those prison walls? And I just have to tell you, it opened my eyes to the importance of forgiveness and to the importance of not judging our fellow man. And I had done enough research. I had done enough to understand that what his father had done to him before him, that created that psychological break, and seeing his own beloved pet murdered before his eyes by his own dad. And so I understood him, but I'm still mad at him for what he'd done to Melissa and to his female victims. And so I had to learn how then how to genuinely forgive, how to genuinely let go. And it's in some of the most uncomfortable, squeamish places. And I remember when I was working on The Witness Wore Red with Rebecca Musser, who was the 19th wife of 65 women. And she was going up against the pedophile prophet Warren Jeffs. And she was one of the only ones with enough bravery and brilliant know-how to be able to make sure that she brought down this prophet and his organized crime unit in the name of God. And it was amazing to see her. And at one point, we were in Texas, and I was waiting outside the courtroom doors for it to open, and they were leading Warren Jeffs. And I was looking at him like I'm looking at you, and just a few feet away. And for the very first time, I looked for light in his eyes because of that gift my dad gave me. I didn't see any. And I do tell you that he deserves the earthly consequences of being behind behind bars for life plus 20 years, because he destroys people. He preys upon children. But I don't have to hate him, and I don't have to withhold my love. And so it's squeamish and it's messy. And I I know that it is a reflection of the darkness inside of me that I'm seeing when I'm judging someone else. And so I can choose to eat myself from the inside out again, or I can choose to offer self compassion, and I can choose to offer compassion. So I looked into Warren Jeff's background and realized that his mothering, his fathering, and the other areas of his life where he was a victim made him who he was. But then he also, as a grown adult, made choices, and he deserves the consequences of that. He's reaping what he sowed. But I don't have to hate him. I don't have to hold that ugliness inside of me, because we're all one. And he's an outward manifestation of what happens when we choose to hurt instead of help or heal. And he's a really good example, as Rebecca Musser says, of what not to be. She discovered
Absolutely.
leadership, and it was not him.
Oh,
And
yeah.
taught
I
me
agree.
so much. Yeah.
I agree. Because I know the audience wants to know this. What does Jesus look like to you?
Mm.
When I have a show that someone has encountered Jesus, they always want to know what he looks like.
Isn't that interesting how we are? And, when I'm teaching storytelling and show me story, it's like, all the senses. What are all the senses? You could drown in his eyes and never want to come back. His eyes were so alive, and they were a beautiful hue, and it's not, to me, an earthly color that I could even describe. There was definitely some beautiful blue, but there was all sorts of hazel and universes in his eyes. There was a child artist, and I have to remember her name. Every once in a while goes out. Do you know who I'm talking about? When I first saw her painting, and it's from a child, and I was like, wow, I really loved it. But he had a little bit of consternation in his eyes, and I never felt that from him, not when I was in his presence. Later, when she was older, she did another painting of him, and his eyes are very gentle. I'm like, that's him. Like, they're both are him, but the tenderness with which he held
Yeah.
was not stern, was not unkind. It was so loving. And that second painting is exactly that compassion and that joy and that beauty in his eyes. That is the closest thing that I've seen
Mm.
that earthly hands have created that look like our creator, our savior.
After seeing what you saw, what do you think the Creator hopes we accomplish here on this earth?
Well, one of those things from personal experience, I will say, is that I feel that he has ultimate faith in humankind. You know, for him to reach out to me in the depths of my own created hell, right? In my own darkness, in my own grief, in my own anguish, in my own fiery pits. He met me there. And I feel like that unconditional love is meant for any of us. So I feel like that's part of it is, you know, we're here to discover that for ourselves and to discover, like, I feel like everyone from their obstacles and struggles, their greatest misery has a ministry, has a calling, has a passion if they choose to find it. And oftentimes we don't want it to be that, right? Like
Mhm,
we
mhm,
don't want it to come from our misery, and yet it is often where our greatest glory lies. In that deepest darkness lies the seeds of our greatest glory. And we can choose a million things to do and be on the planet. I feel like, you know, he doesn't want us to be Ken and Barbie dolls. Like, he is so excited for each individual story, each journey, each purpose that we're here for. And we're here to learn. And some people say tested and tried. And I think we do the testing and trying ourselves. I think we're here to learn through that. And I think we're also here to learn the joy and the bliss on the other side of survival into absolute thrival, because
mhm,
that's where he creates from. So by myself, I create chaos. In co creation with him, anything is possible.
mm,
And so I think that he supports us in that.
mhm. Well, looking at the world today with so much division and fear and uncertainty, what do you think humanity is forgetting that your experience reminded you of? Did I say that right? I think I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that humanity is forgetting that we are one. I think that we're forgetting what happens to our brother or our sister halfway around the world and right next door and in that picket line over there and on that side of the dividing line over here. But we forget that we are one, that we come from the same creator, that we're going to go back into the presence of the same creator. And I think we're here to remember that. But
Mm,
in the most recent darkness, um, there has been a lot of forgetting, and it breaks my heart. Certain days, it's in the midst of war, in the midst of things that are often not necessary. Um, but I also, I'm a student of history, and I'm a avid, voracious student of humanity. And one of the things I've seen over and over is that, like, we had these dark ages and then we went into a renaissance. And that has happened over and over and over again, where we renew ourselves, where we can reclaim the parts of us that are pure and whole, but we can take humanity
mhm,
a step further. And I feel like there are many of us who know we are on the brink of that. And we're all working together, one at a time, but together to bring more light, more knowledge, a lot more love, a lot more compassion and understanding to the planet. So what you're doing, MJ, you know, this is bold and beautiful, and you know,
mhm.
some people thinking you're
Thanks.
crazy because of this or that or the other, and you're doing it. You're bringing these out. And so if we can all be doing what we can do in our own special gifts, in our own ways. Like, I don't have to run a kingdom. I don't have to run for president. I don't have to do any of those things. That's not in my wheelhouse. But what is in my wheelhouse? I can bring light and love and compassion and kindness and wholeness and oneness to that. And so that's what I do. And I love it when I see other people like you doing the same
Mm,
thing.
right? I absolutely love it too. Many experiencers describe reality being far greater than the physical world. Do you believe do you believe that the other side is another place or dimension? Or do you think that it exists around us or alongside us?
I think all of those things.
Me
I'm
too.
constantly I'm constantly amazed at when I ask for more light and knowledge, what I am granted. So one time I was up at a medicine wheel on a ropes course. It was a very sacred place to me where people would take on their lives. And I went early to say some prayers and to walk the medicine wheel. And and I could feel my angels so strong that morning. And I said, I would love to see like where you are and how you work and that kind of thing. And I don't know why my own creative imagination is expecting them to line up in a row along the fence, right? And I'm just expecting this. And then all of a sudden I get this whoosh, multi-dimensional
Mm,
thing all around me. Like it some people might describe it as the Merkaba or, sacred geometry or something, but they were above me and below
mm,
me and aside of me and moving and doing all these things. And it was like, oh, it took my breath away.
mm,
And the more I study, what people experience when they have near death experiences or shared death experiences or spiritual experiences, I just feel like, oh, it's expanding what another human's experience expands what I can see or believe in. And I'm not afraid of it anymore. I
no.
now get really excited to read a new book, like, Conversations with God, or I was reading a couple near death experiences because I'm getting ready for IONS in a few months, and
Right.
there's going to be some special speakers there. And I was like, oh, I want to know what their experience was. And then I'm like listening, going, oh, isn't this lovely? So keeping learning and growing, I think, is the whole key.
Mhm. For those who have been deeply moved by this conversation and your story and want to continue learning from you, can you share your books, works, offerings, services, and where people can find and connect with you?
Yes, thank you, MJ.
You're
First of
welcome.
all, I have a business, but I am not transactional. So
Mm,
you can be my friend and we can enjoy each other without you having to have a book that you want to bring out into the world. I do have a website. It's called
mm,
yourinspiredstory.com. I have a podcast called Stories Across the Table. And I'm a publisher of books, Inspired Legacy Publishing. So you can find all of those online. I'd love to see you on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn. Just would love to be your friend.
And we'll have all that information in the description box below. Now, everyone who comes on the returned returns with a truth, right? What truth did you return with that you think humanity needs to know right now?
Ooh, especially right now, is the stories that we tell ourselves are the most important stories. They will guide our actions. They will guide our habits. They will guide our relationships. They will determine our destiny. And so, if you want your stories to be of limitation, that is what your destiny will be. But if you want your story to be of absolute, unlimitless power, creation, joy, bliss, connection, then let that be the new chapter that you're writing or the new story that you are telling yourself. That would be the ultimate thing that I would say, and that you are so loved.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you so very much. And Bridget, thank you so very much for sharing something so deeply personal. Your story reminds us that love is something we don't have to earn. It is something we all have and always belong to. Thank you for bringing your light, your love, your truth to the return today. It has been an absolute honor to walk through this journey with you today.
Thank you, MJ. I felt the same way. Appreciate you.
Thank you. You too. To everyone watching or listening, perhaps today's conversation isn't about what happens when we die, but about how we're invited to live. If Bridget's story teaches us anything, it's that love asks nothing from us except that we allow ourselves to receive it and then offer it freely to others. Thank you for watching. And until next time, stay open, stay curious, and keep returning to the truth within you.